So we are back with reading creepy Reddit stories while I play Minecraft. I may continue doing the creepy stories. I could do other things, so just let me know what you guys are into. And this first one's a request that I got. They wanted me to do some skinwalker stories, so here's the first one. I've spent the past 2 summers guiding canoe trips in the Lake of the Woods in Minnesota, and have had a few run-ins and heard many stories from other guys about their experiences. The Ojibwe have lived in this area for thousands of years, and there's many places that we can't camp on because they're Indian reservations. I've heard this area referred to as the Wendigo Country, and there's multiple places named after it, like the Wendigo Islands, for example. I have plenty of stories that have been passed down by other guys which are pretty terrifying, and I could share some if there's interest, but I'll just share this one experience I was involved in. It was me, another guide, and we had about 7 kids with us on the trip. On the first night, we stopped after a long day of paddling at a campsite known as Little Trisket. We had one camper with us that was somewhere on the autism spectrum and had big communication issues. As we were making dinner over the fire, he seemed to notice something in the woods behind us. He kept saying things along the lines of, "Who's that man in the woods?" and described it as a tall, skinny man that was all white. We assured him that there was no one there, and we did a head count to make sure all the kids were there. So we checked it out and didn't see anything back there, so we just brushed it off and got back to making dinner. The same night, a different camper was in the tent by herself because she was the only girl on our trip. As me and my co-guy were starting to fall asleep, we heard her say, "Gilly Vanilly, stop." We replied, "What? We're in our tent," and she just brushed it off and went to bed. In the morning, we asked her what was up, and she said that something was shaking her tent and she thought it was us. It wasn't a windy night and the boys were all in their tents, and we were in our tents as well. When we took our tent down and took the stakes out, 2 of them were completely bent at a 90-degree angle. We tested out the flexibility and we couldn't get the thing to budge back. I've been in some crazy windstorms out there, probably with winds around 30 to 40 miles per hour, and I've never seen a stake bent like that. But we left Little Trisket and the weird stuff stopped happening and we had an awesome trip. When we went back to the base camp, I talked to another guy that stayed at the same campsite the night after, and without me saying anything, she said there's some sort of big white creature at that campsite. She told us that she was going to the bathroom way back in the woods and thought that another camper had accidentally came to her bathroom spot and ran away, but when she got back, everyone was there and no one had left the fire in the time she left. There's much scarier stories and experiences other guys have been involved in with these spirits up here. This was my first time and hopefully I won't have any more. We try to treat the wilderness, the spirits, and the native culture with the utmost respect. This makes me feel safe, at least in my own mind, from the spirits, as almost every other story I've heard has started off with someone disrespecting it or claiming that they don't believe it exists. So yeah, me personally, I've never been camping. I don't know. I don't really plan on it, especially hearing some of these weird camping stories, but who knows? Never say never. So this next story is titled, "I'm Pretty Sure I Almost Became a Murder Babysitter Urban Legend." 2 years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these 2 ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m. and the boys were sitting on the couch playing on their iPads and whatnot when someone knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over and they both said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door and it's some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I couldn't see his face. Immediately, I'm like, nope, nope, nope. And don't say anything and start pacing around because I don't want to give them any inclination that we're inside. A couple minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later and the moms get back. They asked me how everything was and I said the kids were great, but somebody had came to the door. They asked me what time and I say around 8, and one of the moms started freaking out and started going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody has been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through your window." They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were, but in retrospect, we're almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that. But I'm just really glad I didn't open that door because I have a feeling in my gut it would have ended really bad. So as the babysitter, putting myself in their shoes, it would have been extremely nice to know that they've been getting weird calls. I definitely wouldn't have been interested in ever going back and babysitting those kids again. So I would have wished them luck. I would have went my way, would have let them go their way, and I'll be making sure my windows and doors are locked every night. And this next one is titled, "Stranger Kept Trying to Open My Door, Then Started Whispering to Let Him In." And they have some additional info here. First of all, I'm a female, 5 foot tall, 24 years old at the time. but getting mistaken for a teenager all the time. Baby face plus tiny frame. Second of all, I live in Europe, so no guns for me. Enjoy. And the story starts here. So the encounter took place a few years ago. I was living in a super huge apartment block in a quite shit one. One late afternoon, I was chilling with my then girlfriend when I suddenly heard faint scratching noises outside of the door. Definitely weird, but I dismissed it, thinking it was probably some neighbor kiddo scratching the walls with a key or some other stupid stuff kids sometimes do. But a moment passed and the noise didn't disappear. Quite the opposite. It got louder. And at this point, I started realizing, what is that sound? It was the sound of a metal object scratching on my door's lock. I immediately got startled and went to look via the peephole. The long corridor was half dark, and right there in front of my door, there was a man. I couldn't see his face too clearly, but I was 100% sure I didn't know him. He was tinkering with the lock in some way, but with the peephole's limited field of view, I couldn't see exactly what he was doing. I made sure all of my locks are well locked, and backed off as it fell silent. Just as I was about to return to the living room, the door handle slowly moved down, pressed from the other side, and it just slowly returned to its initial position. I goddamn freaked. I hurried to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I had, and squatted next to the door. It was locked, but if he managed to pick it, well, there I was, frightened and armed. For a moment, it fell silent again. Then the lever slowly went down and up again. More scratching, and the lever moved again. Then silence again. And then I heard a whisper, "Let me in." My heart skipped a beat, or a dozen of them. And if he was screaming, it wouldn't be as frightening. But he wasn't. He was whispering to my door repeatedly, "Let me in." I think I unfroze for a second because I grabbed my phone and called the security. The apartment block had the security, but they were stationed in a small booth outside of the block itself, which was huge, and I lived on the 8th floor, so it was a really long way to get there from their place. Especially given that they were lazy bastards who usually just watched TV and smoked so much that there was a heavy fog inside of the booth. Still, I gave them a panic call, quickly explaining the situation, and sure enough, the guard laughed it off, saying that the stranger is probably just some drunk neighbor. He told me that the other guard is on the patrol and that they'll call him and tell him to come to my door. I have no idea why I didn't call the police, but I was probably just too frightened to think straight. The block was in the middle of nowhere, so the nearest police station was quite far anyways. My girlfriend just kept observing, probably some kind of stress reaction too. Seconds felt like hours, and after some time it fell silent. 15 minutes later or so, the freaking security guard finally knocked on my door, long after the guy was gone. Good job, man, seriously. Took your sweet time, thank you very much. He said they'll close the gate and check the camera footage, but he didn't look too tense, so I didn't know if they actually did that. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Maybe it was some drunk neighbor who left the elevator one floor too early or too late and thought his wife locked him out. Maybe he was some fucking psycho or a junkie trying to purposely access my door. I'll never know, and I guess I prefer it this way. FYI, I didn't ever see him again. The block itself so big that it was actually a neighborhood on its own. Imagine Sweet Home, but triple that size. Started getting worse and worse until we finally moved out, but not before having a few more experiences like that. So yeah, that's that story. I mean, the only mistake I would say she made was not calling the cops in the first place, even though she did say that they were far. But arming herself and being ready just in case somebody does get into the crib, that was her best bet. And next up, we got the guy in the blue truck. This happened on December 21st, 2016. I'm a 21-year-old Canadian girl, 19 at the time. At this point in my life, I was pretty desperate for attention, so I went on a lot of bad dates and put myself in a lot of bad situations. So when this pretty cute guy started hitting on me, I was pretty flattered and I agreed to go do some mushrooms at his place and get to know each other better. I'm gonna pause right here. Getting to know somebody over some shrooms is insane, but let's continue. I'm not gonna go into details, but let's just say it was a really bad idea. So I ended up leaving his place around midnight, high as with a long and cold walk to the train station ahead of me. It really didn't bother me though, to be honest. I was just happy to be out of the situation and on my way home. I also really enjoyed the cold and had done mushrooms many times by this point and was really enjoying this walk. It was mostly residential streets until you came to a busier street that leads to downtown, and it separates the residential streets from the mall that I worked at the time. And there was a Wendy's that was closer to the lights where I had to cross. Just beyond this mall is a train station. You have to walk either through the mall parking lot or through a field where the old high school used to be to get to the train station. So I got to the lights and was waiting to cross. However, it was quite late and the light was taking what felt like forever for it to change. That's when a blue pickup truck came driving down the road away from downtown. It slowed right down as it passed me before speeding off. I probably should have sensed some danger, but my high ass worried that he slowed down to let me pass, and when I didn't, he left. making me think that the light wasn't gonna change. I then noticed that the same blue truck pulled around the block and was now sitting in the parking lot of the closed Wendy's. Now I realized that something was wrong. The light finally changed and I walked across the street. I planned on just walking past it and going through the mall parking lot to get to the train, and I kept my head down as I walked. The man in the truck yelled something at me as I walked past. I looked up, and in my state, I thought it was a regular customer of mine as I worked in that mall. I raised my hands up in the air like, fuck, you got me. But as I approached the truck, I realized how wrong I was. This was a completely different person, and I was now at the side of his truck in an abandoned Wendy's parking lot, and I just stared at him. I could feel someone staring at me from the back seat of the truck, right behind the driver's seat, but there was no one in the front passenger seat. The driver smiled and asked me things straight out of a PSA. Things like, what part of the city do you live in, and do you live alone? I was being polite and was actually answering his questions truthfully, because for some reason I thought he was a cop. I mean, that had to be why his questions were so forward, right? He obviously knew I was high and was trying to make sure I got home safe, right? Wrong. In a matter of maybe 5 minutes, he knew what part of the city I lived in, that I lived with my dad, and that I planned on taking the train home. It wasn't until that he straight up asked me for directions to my house that I played dumb and said, I didn't know. He kind of raised his eyebrow at me and said, so you don't know where you live? I kind of laughed and was like, nope, I guess not. And I walked around the back of his truck, headed for the field to get to the train station, and he pulled away. I had to cross a small street to get to the field, and I noticed further down the street was the truck parked facing me. It inched forward a little to make it seem like he was leaving. I turned around and kept walking. Then I turned around a few seconds later to see if the truck was still there. I put my arms in the air and yelled, I fucking see you. He then drove off as if he was trying to circle around the mall. I ran into the field and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911 and paused before pressing call. I was clearly high on drugs and there was a good chance that I wouldn't be taken seriously. I was also worried that I was going to have to take the cops back to that guy's house, as it had been where I left from and where I got the drugs from. So instead, I called my dad. By the time he picked up the phone, I was crying. I explained to him what was happening. He said get somewhere safe and call a cab. If I had been smart, I would have taken the train a couple stops in the wrong direction, then called the cab. I didn't. I instead went to the train station that he knew where I was going to be at and called the cab. I waited there for 20 minutes. I kept peeking out to see if he was there, but I didn't see him. My cab arrived and I got in and told the cab where to go. I was looking behind us the whole time. Just before we made it to downtown, I noticed that there was a large truck behind us, but I couldn't see the color until we turned and the truck turned behind us. And what do you know? It was of course blue. I started freaking out and begged for the cab to pull over. He did so reluctantly, and the blue truck slowly rolled by and then turned the corner like he was going to drive around the block. I yelled at the driver to start going again, and he did so, very annoyed. I finally did make it back home and collapsed on my bed with tears. I didn't leave the house for 2 days, terrified that he was driving around my neighborhood looking for me. I did see him in his truck one more time, but it really wasn't worth mentioning. Please be safe, people. There were so many things I could have done to prevent this from happening, but I was too high and dumb to think straight. So that's the end of that story. I know it's extremely dangerous for a lot of women to be walking home alone at night. So my suggestion is, please be aware of your surroundings. Try to get an Uber, a cab, whatever you may need. Try not to take unnecessary risks. That dude's a weirdo and he tried to take advantage. Luckily it didn't work out for him. That's what I got to say about that one. And this next one is called Very Unsettling Encounter with Stranger at My Door. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time and it still creeps me out. I, 21 male at the time, had just moved into a new apartment on the first floor of the building. It was late one night and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon as we were in college and my roommate had friends that would come by to hang out at all hours of the day. I just figured it was one of his friends, so I get up and check the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole was an eyeball pressed against it. Again, this is also something that one of our friends might do just to be funny. I chuckled and opened the door, surprised to see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was very hyper and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was selling, but it was something about the local university. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment. He was fidgeting and even standing on his tippy toes to see inside. Still, I just thought the guy was weird and nervous and might not have been all there. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and stopped the door from closing. Before I can be like, what the f, dude? He smiles at me and says, I like Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 too. Now me and my roommate have been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for the past several days before that. But there was nothing he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. I was taken aback and trying to add things up in my head and confusedly asked, how do you know I play Mario Kart? He then got super nervous and said, oh, I just thought anyone with a couch like that would be in a Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64, cause you know it's like a retro game and that's a retro couch. What the hell is that explanation? Then he was like, okay, bye, and literally scurried away. I shut the door and locked it. I started trying to put the pieces together on how he could have known that, because obviously it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember, it's a first floor apartment that backed up to woods. My roommate got home shortly after that and I immediately tell him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, so we start investigating. At first, it seems as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. My blinds were always down. We went outside and tested it and found that the only way that you could see inside would have been if you had your face right against the window. And even then, you kind of just had to crouch and close one eye just to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details. My window was over a balcony and the Nintendo 64 console was stored inside of the TV stand and was not visible. You'd only be able to see when we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little stoned and it was like 2 a.m. So basically this creep had been jumping the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night. Never saw this guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows and woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing just a couple feet away watching me sleep. Just a very unsettling encounter. I'm glad that nothing more ever came of it and that I never saw him again, but I've always worried what his motives were. Me personally, I would have immediately got a dorm switch. Worst case scenario, I'm switching schools. Probably report this guy, because that was pretty weird. Report him to the school, check the cameras, but it doesn't seem the original poster did any of this. I would have done that. They would have had to find out who this guy was, because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night not knowing who the hell he was. And that's all of them. Hope you guys enjoy it. Subscribe if you're new. Let me know what you guys want to hear next. Appreciate you guys for watching.